Faith. Hi, Miriam. You can unmute yourselves, or I can unmute you. You have to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself and put your camera on, your video on. So far, nothing.
Hi.
Hi.
Camera on, but we're saying hi. And Kenny is joining me now.
Hi, Ken.
Hello,
Hi.
nice to see you.
You don't want to have your camera?
No, we're saving you.
Hi, Susan. I'm out of it. Something got lost. They lost me. I'm not in it. It's Miriam.
I see your name. I see Faith.
Yeah, but I don't see anything. I don't see you either.
Did you turn on your video?
I couldn't. The big black thing came in front of it.
Really? Down
Yes.
below on the left says video.
I'm still out of it.
I don't know. Don Levy, can you help her?
If you can see your, if you
I
can
can't see me.
No, but if you can see the Zoom icon, you probably have some other
I
window.
can see the rabbi, but I see one person, Faith, but I can't see anybody else.
There's no one else here yet to see.
No, but I don't see myself.
Oh. Maybe you should turn it off and start over.
Oh, well, here, you're
Donald Levy, it says Donald Levy is talking. Now I'm in
There you
it.
go.
Oh,
Hi, Miriam. Hi,
Hi
Faith.
there, everybody.
Hi, Miriam.
Oh, so there's just two of us right now?
Three, there's Julie, and her husband Ken, but they don't want to show themselves. So we'll see. Here's Robert.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, that was easy. Thank you.
Can't see you yet, though. Turn on your video.
I thought I had it. Oh, there we go. How's that?
Good.
All right.
Okay. Anyone else? We'll wait a few minutes. How is everybody doing?
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Uh,
How many weeks is it now? Oh my God. It's been 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Long time.
is that how long the official lockdown's been?
I think the school closed like 6 weeks ago. I literally stopped going anywhere. Like it'll be 6 weeks this Friday.
Mm.
Yeah, I stopped a little before it became official.
But you know, I read somewhere people are complaining. They said Nelson Mandela was in prison for 28 years. So we should stop complaining about it, you know, and we'll all be okay, God willing, you know, we just got to keep doing what we're doing.
Yeah, I don't think the world's ever going to be the same geopolitically or health-wise. I think this is the beginning of a very long struggle with the Chinese Communist Party. It's just starting.
Perhaps.
No,
Yeah, you're right.
I'm concerned about it, put it that way. Like the whole chessboard in the world has been rearranged by this.
Well, you're probably right.
I hope I'm wrong. I really do.
Okay. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Susan. It took me a while to get on.
Okay. Hi, Talia.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Good to see everyone. Hi,
Yeah.
Roy. Have our regular.
Rabbi Nanus.
How are you?
Well, thank you.
We'll wait a few minutes. It's what, 12:03. We'll give it another 2 minutes, 3 minutes.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi, Talia. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you.
How was your daughter?
She's doing great. The school and her and online school, it's working out. Whew. It's great. She's good. Thank you.
Oh my God, I love your background, Roy. How'd you do that?
Well, thank you.
That's great.
Rabbi Bo sent me the pictures of both Irmis and Glazer sanctuaries, so
Yeah, I
I've
wanna
added
know
them
that.
to my
Yeah,
backgrounds.
I think
I'm
we
gonna
should.
vary them every
You
time.
get the set design.
Hi,
Academy.
Harold. Hello, Harold. You're just a picture, but I know you're there.
Everybody but me.
Hey, Barbara. Oh my God, it's been so long. So nice to see you.
You too.
It's great. I like your background. Is that your, that's not your, is that your house, the
Oh,
background?
it's Italy.
Oh,
It's the
yeah.
Vatican. That's the Vatican.
But it's Rome.
Yeah, beautiful.
That's where the Vatican is.
That's right. I have this. Okay. So I want to say hello to everyone. We'll start. People will continue to join us perhaps. But I wanted to start with something that I just read about Hasidic wisdom of how to deal with crises. And this is from the Baal Shem Tov, who was the founder of the Hasidic movement. He lived in like the early 1800s in the Ukraine, and he's the one who started the whole Hasidic movement. And he was considered a great mystic, a simple man who had amazing connection with God and with holiness. And he said that there are 3 stages to dealing with the catastrophe that he taught. And I'm not going to tell you the Hebrew words, I'm going to tell you the English words. The first one is called, the first one is called softening. And softening means you can't be rigid and try to control everything, because in a time of this kind of catastrophe or difficulty, we don't have things under control. So by softening, we try to adjust and adapt to what is possible and what is real. We have to soften ourselves and say, okay, I can't do what I used to do, but this is what I can do. I can't, go all out all over in the world, but I can't go to classes. I can't go to services, but I can study. I can go to services online. I can call my friends. I can be in touch in a different way. So that's one idea, softening. The next phase after softening is called discernment. Discernment means not being caught up in rumors, actually trying to understand what's true and what's reality and what's real and what's fiction, what's fake news, what's just alarmist information, because that just makes things worse. So this discernment is actually in Hebrew Havdalah, like the Havdalah of dividing Shabbat from regular life or the regular days, is the same idea of dividing, discerning what is true and what is just our panic and our fear, and trying to be soft, in other words, to do what we can do, to separate ourselves from rumor and fear and anxiety. And then the third, which I love, is called sweetening. And how can we sweeten what we have now? How can we sweeten our lives in any possible way, either by helping others, by giving ourselves some treats, by being kinder to ourselves and kinder to others, and making, just adding any little detail that will sweeten what we're going through right now that's in our control. So I just read this morning. I thought it was very helpful, and I wanted to share that with you as we begin. So let me just repeat again. It's softening, discernment, and sweetening. So those are the 3 phases that this is wisdom from 220 years ago, when there were horrible pogroms and horrible things going on for the Jews. And this is what this great Hasidic master suggested. Yes, Miriam.
Just want to ask for myself personally for 1 second only. Do you have the Hebrew words for sweetening and softening?
I will, I have to look them up because.
Oh, okay. Okay, not important. Not important.
But I will, before we log off, if you hold on, I'll find them. for
You
you.
don't have to waste other people's.
That's okay, when at the end or whatever.
Okay, there.
So we were talking about Hagar last week and how in her relationship with Abraham and Sarah, Sarah saw something, just to recap, saw something that Ishmael, her stepson, was doing, and she insisted that Abraham, exile them, kick them out. And we had read the first half of that, and I just want to go into that before we continue with probably one of the most complex and difficult sections of the Torah, which is the Akedah, which is the binding of Isaac, which I just read some new information about that I want to share with you. But what we look at is that where we left off, God had said, hear your wife's voice. And again, we discussed, like, was he saying, hear the pain in your wife's voice and try to make things better? Or was he saying, listen to what she's telling you? But Abraham took it literally. And so it's Genesis chapter 21. It says, early the next morning, Abraham took some bread and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He placed them over her shoulder together with the child and sent them away. Okay, this is a very wealthy man. He's got flocks, and when these strangers came from to give the announcement about his son, he washed their feet, he gave them a feast. So we ought to look at this, how little he gave Hagar, just some bread and a little bit of water, and sent her off. So the rabbis note that, the commentaries note that. Okay, so then we continue. And Hagar wandered about the wilderness of Beersheba, and when the water was gone, so how long were they walking around, do you think, with one skin of water in the desert? What would you estimate?
A couple of days.
A day, a couple days, if they were very careful. She left the child under one of the bushes and went and sat down at a distance, a bow shot away, and thought, let me not look on as the child dies. And then she sat at a distance, raised her voice, and wept. Okay, so this is very important for what we're going to read in a moment. But so what happened in the desert? What did she do? What happened to them? And how did Hagar react? And what do let's just review that for a second and think about it. What did Hagar do when they ran out of water? What did she do?
Tried to shelter the child.
Who said shelter the child? Actually, okay, shelter the child. She did put him under a bush. But what was she actually doing, do you think?
Not trying to face it.
She's not trying to face it. She said, let me not look as the child dies. Okay. But then it says she raised her voice and wept. And some rabbis say when raising her voice and weeping, she was actually praying and crying, not just moaning and, wailing, but actually raising her voice and weeping. And the Hasidic grandson of the Baal Shem Tov, who was another great master, his name was Reb Nachman of Breslov. He was from Breslov in Poland. And he came up with this, and I wonder if it's based on this special way of praying to God called hitbodedut, which means you go off somewhere by yourself and you raise your voice and you open your heart to God in private. It's a special kind of prayer. You could do it. He suggests doing it actually in nature, going out in nature and just pouring your heart out to God. This is a very special kind of prayer that he felt was very important. And actually what we know about Reb Nachman, there's a whole movement called the Breslovers who follow Reb Nachman and his teachings. And there's a website. You could look it up and see all his wisdom. And he told stories, he told parables, but we also know that he was a depressive. He suffered from depression. And so he was looking for different ways to comfort himself, to comfort others. He understood very much this idea of losing hope, of not feeling hopeful. And so he recognized, he he created this special kind of prayer, which kind of echoes what Hagar is doing when she's in despair and she raises her voice and she pours out her heart to God. So what happens? Does anyone else have this text? If you don't, I'm just going to read it to you. God heard the voice, but this is weird, I mean, to me, of the boy, of the lad, of Ishmael. And an angel of God called to Hagar from the heavens. So even though it says she cried out, it says God heard the voice of the child. So what do you make of that? There's no right answer. I'm curious what you make of that, that she cried and God heard the voice of the child. Any ideas about that? What that might mean?
Was it her own child's voice?
Her own child. But they don't say her child cried. They just say she cried and God heard the child's voice.
Oh, the child within her, I was thinking.
Wasn't it Abraham's child?
It was Abraham and Hagar's child, but this is not Isaac. This is Ishmael.
I know, but it's Abraham's child.
Right. So any thoughts about that?
Yes. The Etz Chaim says he did the cry of the boy.
Right.
Not just his voice, but the cry.
Okay, well, even the cry, but
Yeah, could be a
the
voice.
sentence before says that she was crying out, but
Mhm.
God heard the boy's cry. So sometimes we know when mothers cry or kids start crying, you know what I mean? You're frightened. Perhaps she was crying because he was crying. Or perhaps a mother's cry for her child is like her child crying for itself. Your mother cries and this is the voice of the child when the child can't cry. When you have a sick child or a child in trouble, sometimes the mother is crying out in the name of the child. So whatever it was, God heard her and the voice of the child. And you know, it's interesting. Earlier, he's called a Yeled, which means a child. And now he's called a Na'ar, which means a youth. So we're not clear how old he was. You know, I think it's interesting. I can't find any commentary that why it's two different words for the same Ishmael. First, he's a baby, actually, this is coming to me now. Perhaps this experience made him grow up or matured him or aged him. And he started this as a child and he became a youth, you know, through the trauma, through the experience, you know. I'll actually tell you a true story about a Holocaust survivor. And by the way, today is Yom HaShoah and we're remembering the Holocaust. And in Israel, they actually have a blast of a siren and the whole country stands still. People get out of their cars and stand for a minute of silence. So a woman who was a Holocaust survivor told me she was 19, her sister was 22 or 23. They were taken to Auschwitz. It was horrible. And they were separated. They were put in showers, but they were real showers because they were young workers and their heads were shaved. And afterwards, they were wandering around looking for each other with these rags or these uniformy, you know, stripy pajama clothes. And she couldn't find her sister. And suddenly she realized her sister was standing right next to her. But in those 2 hours, her hair had turned completely white from fear. So she had aged in 2 hours is what I'm saying. So perhaps not like that, but Ishmael became older, or the experience. We know he was at least 13 because that's when he was circumcised. So he was a teen. And first they call him a child. So he was spoiled, a young kid, childlike. Now he was becoming on his way to manhood because of this experience. Okay, and the angel says, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is." So again, the comment is where he is. What does that mean, do you think? Voice of the boy where he is. Is it just a literal, he's under the bush? That's what you're talking about? Or do you think it's something else?
Is it okay to just?
Yeah.
Hi. Okay. So before when you were asking about God heard the voice of the child, but it was her voice.
Right.
I was thinking that it's that we are responsible to speak out for those that can't speak for themselves.
Right.
The unseen, for all of that. So that was more for that comment. So
No, that's fine. Yes, thank you. We do speak out. Where he is, knowing that, you know, he's not the heir to the legacy of Abraham, but he's still valuable. He's still part of Abraham's lineage. So perhaps it's that. And he already gave a prophecy that he was going to be kind of a wild, free character. So he sees him where he is, and the angel says, "Rise, lift up the lad and hold him by the hand, for I will make him a great nation." And then God opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. So what does that mean? He opened her eyes and she saw a well of water. Was the well always there, do you think? Or did it just appear? What do you think? No opinions?
I thought it meant, I was thinking it meant a well of tears, but that's different.
Well, this is a well that they drank from. And it says she went and filled the skin with water and gave the lad to drink. So, you know, sometimes things are there and we just don't see them. Our eyes are not open. We don't see things in people. We don't see what we have. And sometimes until we lose it or until we really need it, or suddenly, you know, there's this video, of course, you may have seen it, where it's about not being appreciative of what you have. And it starts with like this beautiful sports car, and this guy in like a regular car says, "Oh, I wish I had that car." And then you see a guy next to him in like an old clunker and says, "Oh, I wish I had that car." And then you see a guy in a bike saying, "Oh, I wish I had a car." And then you see a guy walking who said, "I wish I had a bike." And then you see a guy in a wheelchair saying, "I wish I could walk." So sometimes we don't see what we have. And so God opened her eyes. Maybe that was, you know, psychologically, emotionally.
Even aware
Yeah.
of herself, like what she has in her, like her own awareness of self too.
Exactly. And so, and she gave the boy to drink. And then it says, so they were okay. We don't really know what happened, but God was with the lad and he grew up. So they grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became a bowsman, which is, you know, a hunter. He became a hunter. And he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife from the land of Egypt. So we go all the way from him being this lost child to growing up to becoming a man, a successful man who made a living, who had a, you know, they survived by hunting. He was a hunter. Kind of reminds me of Esau, you know, and Jacob. Isaac was the home brother, and this was what they call the wild guy, the free guy, the rider. You think about Bedouins, you think about Arab horsemen, you know, in the deserts there. He was that kind of a guy, and he got married. He got married and he had a successful life. So we look at this blessing of Ishmael and Hagar, and then we jump to the Akedah, which I don't know how many people have this. I had asked you to print it out. It's the story of the sacrifice of Isaac. So before I go through it, I want to know, what do you know about the story of the sacrifice of Isaac? What do you know already? Susan, do you want to say?
Okay, God put Abraham to a test, and we don't know what that, well, what the test was, but the test was to sacrifice his son, his only son, his beloved son, and that's repeated in the story. So Isaac packs provisions, a mule or a donkey, and firewood, and I think two servants, and they go up to Mount Moriah, where the sacrifice is to take place. But nary a word is said. Neither of them speak to each other. Isaac asks some questions, And when they get to the top of, should I go on?
Yeah.
When I get to the top of Mount Moriah, Abraham binds his son Isaac, ties him up on what is to be the altar. And supposedly is going to, what does he lift his
Knife.
And at that time, he is stopped. Angel of the Lord comes from heaven, and then Isaac is freed. There's a ram's horn. He noticed the ram's horn, and the ram is going to be sacrificed instead of Isaac.
Right. So first of all, I want to talk, the Midrash says about angels, you know, we've just talked about there was an angel with Hagar, there's an angel with Abraham, that angels only can do one task at a time. So it's a different angel for every different task. They're limited. And so there was a different angel for talking to Hagar. And it's interesting that God sends these angels into it doesn't speak directly to many of our ancestors. He often sends angels, and the word for angel is messenger. And I've talked about this before, that sometimes messengers come to us and we don't realize they're angels. They have a message for us and they teach us something, and then they disappear and we may never see them again. They show up, they give us a message, and they disappear. And the word malach is the same for Hebrew for messenger and angel. So Abraham is told to do this, and he does, as Susan said, he doesn't protest at all. He doesn't say anything. Now, is this in character for him? We've seen him in the past when God said he was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. He argued quite a bit about not destroying the city, but he says nothing. And we have to compare, the rabbis compare him to Hagar. Hagar cried out, wept, begged for her son, and Abraham said nothing. He said nothing. So there's a lot of controversy with the rabbis about why he didn't even try to say anything. And I just read a midrash that's, God could have given the Torah to any of our ancestors, but he didn't give it until the time of Moses. And this is considered one of the egregious bad behaviors of Abraham, that he did not even raise his voice in protest. That is one of the reasons he did not get the Torah. Also, he is completely willing to do whatever God says in this case, even though, so some people think Abraham was testing God to see if God would really go through with it. Some people say God was testing Abraham to see if he would protest or talk. That was the test. Argue, save his child. Because, child sacrifice was common in that time, and this was considered, a horrendous sin and an offense to God to spill human blood. And then there's the question of Isaac. What do we think about Isaac, who barely says a word about his character? So any comments about any of this, about Abraham's character, or Isaac's character, or God's character in this story? Because they're all something that we grapple with. And interestingly, we read this story on Rosh Hashanah. We read the story on Rosh Hashanah. This is the Torah portion, on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. So any thoughts about what do you think the test actually was? Any thoughts about that?
Well, you asked about Isaac.
Yes.
Isaac too. He was an adult already when this transpired.
Well, if you're, maybe. I mean, yes, if you're literally counting, but since these stories were probably not necessarily created in chronological order, we don't necessarily know how old he was. I know the Orthodox will calculate that he was in his 30s, but that doesn't really make any sense unless he was a very passive person. Does that bother you, Susan, that he's supposedly an adult?
Yes, but even if he were a teenager, yeah, maybe he missed his rebellious stage. But the whole story is very, very problematic to me, and I'm not in love with it. I'll say that. That's because one, with Abraham going through with this, and not questioning when he questioned before, but he also was a warrior, for goodness sakes, and took the offensive at times. But so that bothers me. The God issue that you brought up also bothers me. Why he put him to such a severe test, and Isaac's passivity in this was strange too. I mean, he was bound on the altar, for goodness sakes, and it took a while for him to realize that he was going to be the sacrificial lamb rather than the ram.
So there's a lot of interesting midrashim about this. One is that Isaac actually was killed, that Abraham did it, and then an angel brought him back to life. So some people believe that he was killed. They also talk about that the reason we know later that Isaac he was blind, remember, when you can't decide who to bless, either Jacob or Esau, that when the angel appeared, the blinding light from the heavens hurt his eyesight, and he could never really see properly again. That was another possible midrash about it. Also, Abraham was how old? He was over in his hundreds. And so I ask you, do you think that we make decisions differently at different stages of our lives, according to our age? How does that affect our decisions? Do you think, so Barbara, you're nodding your head. So what are you thinking?
I don't know. You know, I do think that maturity teaches us to pause before we make decisions. I just buy these things, though. I believe the Bible. I believe that Abraham just wanted to obey God's commandment to kill, to sacrifice his son. I do believe it. So I kind of take it literally.
You take it literally. So let me ask Talia.
I just find it so fascinating that words can change how a situation looks or feels. So the slip of killed his son, if we walked around saying he killed his son, most people would not feel that was an act of God, or that was the right, the right path. I mean, because thou shalt not kill. Right. So to put that in that term, instead of calling it a sacrifice, I find so fascinating that just by changing the terminology, it doesn't change the fact of what he did. So the intention is still to kill.
Exactly. And the word is actually an offering. It's not even sacrifice. It's considered like a gift or an offering.
It's over.
Yes, it's, I agree with you. Well, wait, you said you take it literally, but wait, the thought came right out of my mind, left my mind. You said you believe that it really happened. Oh yeah. So I've asked this before to other groups. What do you think Sarah would have said if God would have told her to sacrifice her son?
No way.
Does anyone think Sarah would have listened to God?
I think she might have.
You think she might have?
I do.
Okay. Anyone else have an opinion about that?
I don't think she would. I said no way. She was more feisty, I think, judging by some of her past actions, and getting Hagar to go with her husband, and then when Hagar was nasty to her or supercilious, she blamed her husband, and then she told her husband to get Ishmael out of there, and she was attached to Isaac and saw him as the future.
Yeah, she said, Ishmael's not going to share my son's inheritance. That was part of her reason. She thinks now she's going to go sacrifice him. She would have said, sacrifice me instead. And I read an interesting comparison in the book Night by Elie Wiesel, that they compared this sacrifice of Isaac, where his name was, that Elie Wiesel's father, his name was Eliezer, sacrificed himself to save his son, that he gave him food, that he died. So it was the reverse of the Akedah. You know, we don't see Abraham saying, put me on the altar. You know, I will not do that to my son. So he's a very, again, as I've talked about, leaders who are good in the public square and terrible at home, or don't have their values. Or I also have wondered if Abraham was worried about, he's the only representative of the new monotheism in the world. And if God gives him this order and he disobeys it, how would it look? How would it look? So if he's worried about, you know, I have to listen to God, because otherwise it looks like I'm not a faithful follower or believer, even if I have to sacrifice my own son. So again, what's interesting, and I want to also add that the Christians interpret this and Abraham's faithfulness as sort of a metaphor for the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross to God, that God asks you to sacrifice. God sacrificed his only son, they believe. And so this is kind of like Abraham is the, you know, example and the precursor and kind of forecasting what, you know, was going to happen with Jesus, and how you have to show your love of God. And I actually had a Christian minister once call up at the temple and talk to me and ask me why I didn't believe in Jesus. And I said, well, you know, things didn't get better. You know, he died, but nothing got better, especially for the Jewish people. And he said, well, that's all forecast for the suffering. And I said, well, that's not my kind of God. That's not a God I want to follow. And I think similarly, we wonder why Abraham didn't, he's pretty new at this. I guess it's been what? He left when he was 75. So it's been like 25, 35 years, maybe 40 years, that he's just so blindly gonna, though he questions Sodom and Gomorrah, he doesn't question this. Another thing, yeah, go ahead, Susan.
As always, I learned this is Miriam.
Yeah, Miriam.
As always, I learned something new from you. You asked a very profound question today, and I haven't heard it before. Although I studied this passage for maybe 75, 85 years of my life.
Right.
I don't remember when I was 85, but okay. I studied it so many years that this was never asked, and it's a very simple and very profound question at the same time. You said and made us think, do we do the same things at 90? Or he was over 100?
100, yeah.
Well over 100. Do we do the same things that we did when we were 60, when we were kids, when we were 70, we were kids? And the question here is, first of all, this always bothers me, this passage. It will always bother me, and I want it to continue bothering me. It will never be resolved. And you have brought up many more questions and many more things to think about. And one of them was, do we, in our very elderly years, we are seniors, do we think the same way? Do we do the same things? Do we act the same way? And here we have a picture of the opposite of Sodom. We have a picture of a non-confrontational man.
Right.
He was not interested in having any more confrontations.
Yeah, he was tired maybe. Or
Yes, and he was tired, he was fatigued, he was spent from pleading for Sodom up till, what if we find 10 righteous
Right.
men in that city, etc. So therefore, you made me think of this. I appreciate it, and I think it was very profound on your part. Thank you.
Thank you. So then we noticed that after this event, it says Abraham, Abraham and Isaac went up to the mountain together, but they walked back separately. And they weren't together and they never spoke again. But what I read that I didn't realize is that Isaac went back to Sarah and Abraham went with his servants somewhere else. And perhaps Sarah was alienated from him as well after this, though there is a midrash that when she heard about it, she died immediately. But that's the midrash. We know the next chapter she dies, but perhaps there was time where it was the two of them separated from Abraham because of this. Because later, as I'm thinking about it now, when Isaac finally meets Rebekah and marries her, he takes her into his mother's tent, which means he's living either in her tent or next to her tent. So he was, because that's what they say, he brings her into Sarah's tent. So obviously Sarah separated from Abraham, Isaac separated from Abraham, and it destroyed the family, his decision, whether God blessed him. There's it feels very, very cruel, and it just destroyed the family completely. So Abraham started with 2 wives, 2 sons, and by this point he has no one. He's all by himself. Yes, Susan.
That raises interesting questions. It's Abraham who has his servant Eliezer, the wife for Isaac.
Yes.
So somehow is that trying to reconcile to get a wife? And I hadn't heard that Isaac never went. I never heard it anywhere where Isaac went after that. Just the next chapter.
Right. Well, she's dead when he does that. She has died once he finds the wife. So he couldn't reconcile with his wife, but perhaps with his son. But before we go there, there's now an interesting comparison between Hagar and Abraham that I found, where Abraham, he wakes up early in the morning both times to take, sacrifice or give up his sons. He wakes up early in the morning and kicks out Hagar and Ishmael. He wakes up early in the morning and takes Isaac to the mountaintop. And that an angel appears at both times to save the day. One where really they were helpless, and one where Abraham needed stopping, it seems. And also Sarah, it ends the story of Ishmael with Hagar getting a wife for Abraham, for her son. And at the end of this chapter, we read about the birth of Rebekah. We just know that this baby girl was born. It's one of the very last sentences in the Parsha, which I think, why would it be in this Parsha? After this whole story, the very last section says, now it came to pass after these things, we're told Abraham was told to Abraham, and they told him about all these births back, in Ur. And one of them was Bethuel begot Rebekah. They just list all these names, but Rebekah is born at the very end of the chapter. And also before that, it tells us that Abraham and his young men went to Beersheba, but he didn't go with Isaac. So they're completely split. And then we say, and by the way, Rebekah was born. So why do you think when the rabbis were putting together the different parts of the Torah, they included Rebekah's birth at the end there?
So Isaac was going to marry Rebekah.
So there was a foreshadowing, or I also think like after this whole story of death,
Yeah.
they want to end on life. They want to end on a birth, on life, on children, on hope, because
Yeah.
this was about the sacrifice of a child. And now we end with all the birth of these children to emphasize even more that what we value in Judaism is not sacrificing our children, giving birth, having families, having weddings, having, that kind of, celebration. And okay, so that was another thing that I wanted to share with you. So then there were these modern poems. I mean, if you downloaded what I sent you, modern poems and stories about this Binding of Isaac's tale that reverberated all the way to today. Leonard Cohen wrote a song
Yeah.
about it. But there was a medieval poet who wrote this amazing poem where the Torah and God are arguing about who should the Torah be given to. This was written in, what was it, in the Middle Ages, like 1100 or something. And the name of the poet was called Kilir. I guess he was a Spanish or Arabic Jewish poet. And the Torah argues that Abraham never pleaded for his son's life, so the Torah should not be given to Abraham. It says, this is what the Torah says. The young man with whom you graced him when his strength was spent, he bound on the wood of the altar. Arrested for 3 days, he offered his chick. It was pleasant and his offering was accepted. He became great and his reputation spread throughout the land. But he forgot how a father is supposed to have mercy on children. A prayer or a plea he should have offered. So this was like, we're grappling with it. This is like in 1000 CE. This poet was saying it bothers us. It bothers us and bothers us all through the generations. And then there was a Yiddish writer who wrote about this in like the late 1800s. Oh, no, this was in 1500. That one was in 1000. This was in 1500, a Yiddish poem in the Ashkenazic tradition where he wrote this. Isaac's face was covered in hot tears. Dear father, what are you going to say to my mother when she does not see me returning with you? Dear son, I know well what will happen to us both. I and your dear mother, Sarah, after your death will not long remain on earth. For who could comfort me in my misery and your mother in her grief and pain? So here's Abraham saying, yes, I'll be sad, but I still have to do it.
Mhm.
So that was like in the Middle Ages, in the 1500s, the late Middle Ages, at the beginning of the Renaissance. And then, this is fascinating, Wilfred Owen, who was an English poet, and he wrote really heartbreaking poems after World War I about the sacrifice of the flower of youth and all the young men who were sent to war. And he wrote this. So Abraham rose and clave the wood and went and took the fire with him and a knife. And they sojourned both of them together. Isaac, the firstborn, spoke and said, my father, behold the preparations, fire and iron, but where the lamb for this burnt offering? Then Abraham bound the youth with belts and straps and builded parapets and trenches there. So this is imagery of World War I. And he stretched forth the knife to slay his son, when lo, an angel called him out of heaven, saying, lay not your hand on the lad. Don't do anything to him. Behold, a ram caught in the thicket by its horns. Offer the ram of pride instead of him. But the old man would not do so, but slew his son and half the seed of Europe, one by one. So he's talking about how old men sacrificed the youth of Europe in World War I based on this story. So this story has so much power that it influences us and affects us in a very deep way. And so and we're looking at family relationships, and today, how do people sacrifice their children for their own sakes? Not literally with their lives, but often for their egos, they will sacrifice children. My daughter had a friend when she was younger, when she was like 10, and her friend's mother put her in judo, and she was in judo for years, like not judo, karate class. And her daughter really wanted to quit because she hated it. And her mother said, no, because I can't have a daughter who's a quitter. So it was more about the mother's ego. And I actually had another friend who was molested. And she was a young girl by her father, and her mother knew, but would never tell anyone because it would make the family look bad. So there are ways to sacrifice our children for our own egos or for our own sakes, or sacrifice our friends, sacrifice our partners because we don't want to look bad, or we don't want to fail. I mean, I think there's a lot of cutthroat business because like money and success becomes more important than doing the right thing, than compassion, than love, than kindness. And
what's going on now?
yes, it is. Yes, it is going on now. I agree with you. It's like people want to sacrifice lives for the sake of business, some people. So that's the Torah portion for today, the thing that we're going to end with. And anybody have any comments or any questions or anything they want to say?
Yeah, I had one thought.
Yeah.
I think your insights on parental ego are really, really good, and I like the idea of bringing it back down to a practical situation. But as we're talking about this, I realize this passage creates a really brilliant paradox, because we all come to Judaism, where people come to faith and think of God as something that's universal and good and inclusive. And to some degree, that's a very abstract kind of theater of the mind kind of a proposition. And this story says, what do you do when your abstract beliefs of universal goodness as manifested in your God tell you to do something that in the real world is absolutely horrific? It's the ultimate dilemma for a human being, especially a Jew, given how much universalism is emphasized in this religion. So it gets you right down to ground zero, is when do you obey the big guy, and when do you say cut and run? I have to disobey you because I believe in what you stand for in the best sense of the world. This is just brilliant stuff. It's
so
amazing.
There's a wonderful section in the Talmud about this argument about, it's called the oven, like a cooking oven of Achnai. And there's this question, because the Talmud deals with these nitty gritty, tiny little details. Is this oven kosher or not? And there's a group of rabbis arguing, and there's one rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer, who's very, very smart, and he's like a genius. No, Rabbi Gamliel, he's very smart. And he says, it's not kosher. And the other rabbis say, it's kosher. And so Rabbi Gamliel, who was considered this is like midrash, he was like a magician. He said, if I'm right, may the river that's flowing reverse direction and flow the opposite way. And it does. So then the rabbis say, no, it's still kosher. He says, no, if I'm right, may all the trees lift up out of the earth and, ascend into the air like 10 feet. And it happens. And they go, no, it doesn't matter. It's kosher. And then he says, if I'm right, let God's voice, a bat kol, which is the voice of God, tell you I'm right. And the voice says he's right. And the rabbis say, you gave the Torah to us. It's our Torah now. It's our Torah now. And God says, he smiles and says, my children have done well. So from that, we learn that you can reinterpret and even refute if you all are in agreement. And I think that is one of the great things about, Judaism. It's flexible. And also, so many rabbis and scholars over the generations find such a problem with this story that they would never allow it. They would never allow this. And there was one 15th century Italian rabbi who said it never happened. He hallucinated it. He misunderstood completely. So you're right, Robert. But sometimes we know what's right. And either we're misunderstanding or it doesn't matter because the Torah is ours now to make it.
I think the genius of Judaism is in the interpretation and counter-interpretation and just be engaged in the exercise of actively trying to sort out moral obligation. I mean, and it's like if you're constantly engaged in that activity, you're gonna hit the ball more often than not, I think. That's the beauty of it.
I agree with you, but I love what you said and thank you for bringing that up because it is our dilemma. And, you know, in the Hasidic courts and everything, every rabbi in, you know, this is like in the 18th and 19th centuries kind of ruled one way or the other. And if you could switch rabbis, you could switch to another more lenient or stricter rabbi. And there's also this other thing, and I'll end with this in the Talmud. There's a question about if a drop of milk falls into a chicken soup, is it still kosher? And you know you're not supposed to have milk and meat. And the rabbis say it depends on whose soup it is. If you're too poor, to afford another chicken, it's kosher.
Oh, that's very nice.
I love that. If it's too poor, if you can't afford another chicken, it's fine. So I
That's
want to
good.
wish you all well.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom this week.
Shalom.
This Friday night, we'll be doing services with some guests from Israel because it's Israel Independence Day. I have a guest that I'm going to Zoom in from Israel. So if you want to join us, I'll love to have you there. And bye, everybody, for now. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat shalom.
Toda, toda.
You're welcome.
Thank you for everything.
Robert, I always enjoy what you say.